Welcome to Audiobooks. Immerse yourself in the world of stories, ideas, and knowledge, all through the power of audio. Book title, 1984, by George Orwell. Chapter 1, The World of Oceania. It was a cold April day in London, and the clock struck 13. A bitter wind carried the smell of boiled cabbage and dust through the streets, pushing against gray apartment blocks where telescreens watched endlessly. Posters of a stern, mustached face stared down from every wall, its eyes seeming to follow each passer-by. Beneath it, the words appeared in bold, unforgiving letters, "Big Brother is watching you." In this city, once London, now Airstrip 1, the people moved with quiet obedience. There was no privacy. Every sound, every twitch of the face, every fleeting thought could betray a citizen to the party. This was life in Oceania, a vast empire where freedom was a forgotten relic and loyalty to the party was absolute. Winston Smith shuffled homeward through the bleak corridors of Victory Mansions, a place where victory meant crumbling walls, the stink of rancid oil, and an elevator that never worked. He was a thin, frail man, 39 years old, with a weary face etched by years of anxiety and silent rebellion. His ankles ached from a varicose ulcer, but what pained him more was the knowledge that his every breath was monitored. Inside his flat, the telescreen flickered, a metal plaque mounted on the wall, larger than a mirror, alive with noise and surveillance. It barked orders, blared patriotic songs, and never, ever turned off. Winston moved carefully, keeping his back to the screen. Though it could not see his thoughts, it might catch a glance, a gesture, the slightest sign of disloyalty. Thought crime, after all, was the gravest offense. He sat at a small wooden table, an object he had pushed into the corner of the room. On it lay an item both ordinary and deadly, a blank notebook. Paper was rare, and Winston had gone to great lengths to acquire it. He had hidden it for weeks, waiting for the moment he could risk using it. Tonight, the need to act outweighed the danger. With trembling hands, he opened the book. The creamy paper, unmarked by the party's slogans or statistics, felt almost luxurious. He uncapped his pen, another relic, difficult to come by in a world where writing itself was discouraged, and leaned forward. His heart pounded as though he were committing murder. He began to write. The words came slowly at first, clumsy, uncertain. But soon his pen scratched faster, filling the page with forbidden thoughts. Down with Big Brother. The phrase repeated itself, sprawling across the paper. He did not plan it. The words had poured out of him, unbidden and unstoppable. Winston froze. His breath caught in his throat. To write such a thing was death. Not immediately, perhaps, but sooner or later the thought police would know. They always knew. The punishment was inevitable. Arrest, torture, vaporization, erasure from existence. Yet in this small act of rebellion, Winston felt a strange surge of relief. For the first time, he had claimed a piece of himself that the party could not touch. Outside, the city droned with its routine oppression. Loudspeakers announced triumphs at the front lines of endless wars. Citizens gathered in squares for the 2-minute hate, screaming at the party's enemies until their throats went raw. Children in gray uniforms sang songs praising Big Brother while denouncing traitors with zeal. Even within families, love had been hollowed out, replaced with suspicion and fear. Children spied on parents, husbands and wives betrayed each other. No one was safe. Yet Winston, alone in his flat, felt the faint stirrings of humanity. He knew that he was already a dead man, though still breathing. To think freely was to condemn oneself. Still, he could not stop. Something within him, fragile but unbreakable, whispered that truth mattered, that freedom mattered, even if both were destined to vanish. Chapter 2. The machinery of control. The next morning, the routine of Oceania began again, mechanical and merciless. The telescreen roared to life before dawn, barking orders for morning exercises. Citizens bent and stretched on cue, their bodies trembling under the gaze of an invisible instructor who shouted accusations of laziness through the screen. Winston obeyed, his joints aching, sweat dripping, heart pounding. He dared not falter. The telescreen never missed a mistake. When the session ended, Winston dressed for work. His path took him past streets filled with crumbling houses and bombed-out ruins, reminders of wars that never seemed to end. London bore the scars of endless conflict, yet the party announced victory after victory. Truth did not matter, only belief did. At the Ministry of Truth, a looming white pyramid so massive it dwarfed everything around it, Winston slipped into his cubicle. The ministry's purpose was not to spread truth, but to destroy it. His task was simple, yet terrifying in its implications: to rewrite the past. Whenever the party declared that Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia, Winston altered newspapers to erase all evidence to the contrary. If Big Brother predicted a shortage of boots, but later claimed success, Winston corrected the records so the prediction matched reality. And when people disappeared, when they were vaporized, Winston scrubbed their names from existence as though they had never lived. In this way, the party did not merely control the future, it controlled memory itself. Yesterday could be reshaped, today rewritten, tomorrow guaranteed. History was clay in their hands, molded endlessly until only one truth remained, the truth of Big Brother. The slogans of the party echoed in Winston's mind as he worked. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. There were contradictions, yet citizens learned not to question them. To question was to commit thought crime, and thought crime meant death. Doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs at once and accept them both, was the cornerstone of survival. Even language itself was being destroyed. The party's project of newspeak aimed to shrink the vocabulary year by year, stripping words of their complexity until rebellion became literally unthinkable. If a word like freedom no longer existed, then the idea of freedom could not exist either. Thought was shaped by words, and by narrowing language, the party narrowed imagination. Winston's pen scratched across paper after paper, replacing names, altering numbers, revising history. Each correction vanished into pneumatic tubes, sent down to the incinerators. The truth burned before it was even read. By the end of the day, Winston would forget what he had changed, and so would everyone else. The lie became the truth, and the truth became the lie. And yet, somewhere deep inside him, Winston knew the falseness of it all. He remembered, or thought he remembered, moments when the party's claims had been different, when yesterday contradicted today. These fragments of memory were dangerous. Memory was rebellion. During the lunch break, Winston sat alone in the canteen, surrounded by colleagues who spoke only in clichés of party loyalty. One man boasted of his son denouncing a neighbor to the thought police. Another praised the latest reduction of chocolate rations, calling it a victory, though Winston recalled that rations had in fact been cut. None of them noticed the contradiction. They cheered as if it were a gift. Children, Winston reflected, were the party's most loyal soldiers. Trained to worship Big Brother and despise his enemies, they were encouraged to spy on their parents, to report unorthodox behavior. The family itself had become another tool of surveillance. Love, trust, even private affection had been replaced by suspicion and fear. Returning to his desk, Winston felt the weight of the system pressing down. The party's power was not only in what it forced people to say, but in what it forced them to believe, or at least to accept without question. A lie told enough times became reality. And if all reality lay in the party's hands, then the individual was nothing. Still, Winston clung to his fragile sense of self. He did not shout slogans with conviction. He did not cheer at ration cuts. He did his work, but somewhere inside him a quiet defiance burned. He knew there was truth beyond the party's reach. He could not prove it, he could not say it, but he could feel it deep in his bones. Chapter 3. Dreams and Memories. Sleep came fitfully to Winston, broken by images that felt more vivid than waking life. In the darkness of his narrow flat, his mind slipped into landscapes that no longer seemed to exist. He found himself wandering through the golden country, a place of sunlit fields, clear streams, and swaying trees untouched by war or surveillance. The air was warm and clean, filled with the scent of grass. Birds sang freely. It was a vision so pure, so alien to his daily existence, that Winston clung to it desperately, as though it were a memory rather than a dream. But the dream shifted. A figure appeared, a woman with dark hair, tearing away her clothes with a gesture so careless, so graceful, it left Winston breathless. It was not the act itself that moved him, but the spirit of it, an act of freedom, unashamed and unbroken. In that moment, she became the embodiment of rebellion, a symbol of a world where passion was not a crime. Winston woke with his heart pounding, the image seared into his mind. And then came another dream, colder, heavier. His mother and sister appeared, faces pale and eyes hollow. They were seated in a deep, dark place, perhaps a cellar, perhaps a grave. He remembered scraps of a childhood long erased by the party's revisions, hunger, fear, the endless struggle for survival. His mother's eyes, calm yet sorrowful, seemed to accuse him, not of betrayal, but of existing in a world that demanded such betrayals. His sister, frail and silent, faded into the shadows beside her. Winston had long ago accepted that his family was gone, swallowed by the machine of Oceania. Whether they had died in the purges or starved in obscurity, he could not say. What haunted him was the sense that they had perished for his sake, giving their lives so he might live. Yet the memory was fragmented, uncertain, perhaps even false. The party insisted that the past was malleable, that memory itself was treacherous. And still, Winston felt in his bones that this sorrow was real. He sat on the edge of his bed, sweat clinging to his skin. He knew the party despised these private dreams, for they belonged to a place beyond its reach. They were untidy, irrational, stubbornly human. To dream of love or family was to keep alive a seed of individuality, a refusal to submit entirely. The party sought to erase even this, through doublethink, through propaganda, through the slow narrowing of the mind. Yet dreams endured, surfacing like weeds through cracked concrete. As Winston dressed for the day, the telescreen droned statistics of production quotas and military triumphs. He hardly listened. His thoughts lingered on his dreams, on fragments of a life before Big Brother. He could not prove those memories, but they were more real to him than the party's endless stream of lies. At work, the machinery of falsehood pressed on as always. Winston altered documents, erased names, and crafted illusions. But he carried his dreams like contraband in his mind. A patch of sunlight, a mother's sorrow, a woman's fearless gesture. These were truths no record could confirm, yet they felt unshakably genuine. In Oceania, truth was not what happened. Truth was what the party declared. But Winston sensed that somewhere, buried deep, the past lived on, stubborn and unyielding. He could feel it in his dreams, in half-remembered faces, in whispers of a world that had once been. For the party, dreams were dangerous. They reminded citizens that reality could not be fully rewritten. As long as one person remembered differently, as long as one heart yearned for freedom, the party's grip was not absolute. Winston walked the corridors of the ministry with this dangerous knowledge pressing against his chest. Outwardly, he was obedient. Inwardly, he was haunted by the idea that truth could still exist, if only in memory. And so he lived between two worlds, the cold, colorless present imposed by the party, and the vivid, fragile realm of dreams that refused to die. Chapter 4. Forbidden Desires. The days at the Ministry of Truth blended into one another, a blur of corrections, revisions, and lies polished into fact. Winston kept his head low, his hands busy, and his mind hidden. Yet in the quiet recesses of his thoughts, something had begun to stir, a forbidden hunger not for food nor drink, but for connection. It started with a glance. In the corridors of the ministry, Winston noticed a young woman with dark hair tied back, moving with brisk efficiency. She worked in the fiction department, he thought, producing propaganda novels churned out by machines and edited by party loyalists. At first, her presence filled him with unease. Women of her type were often zealots, devoted to the party, eager to expose disloyalty in others. Worse, she belonged to the Junior Anti-Sex League, her red sash a badge of chastity and fanaticism. Winston feared her. Once, when their eyes briefly met, he imagined she was watching him, cataloging his nervous habits, waiting for the moment to betray him. For days he avoided her gaze. The party encouraged such suspicion, every relationship poisoned, every glance a potential trap. Yet something about her unsettled him differently. In the evenings, as he scratched dangerous words into his secret diary, her face intruded upon his thoughts. He imagined her stripped of her uniform, her sash discarded, her body alive with rebellion. It was not merely lust, it was defiance. Desire itself was rebellion in Oceania. The party despised love, passion, even pleasure. Sex was tolerated only as a duty to produce children loyal to Big Brother. To desire for one's own sake was to claim ownership of the self. It was an act of independence, a betrayal of the party's demand for total loyalty. Winston knew this, and yet he could not banish the thought of her. Then, one morning, the moment came. As Winston walked through a crowded corridor, the young woman stumbled, falling forward as though by accident. In that instant, she reached out and pressed a small scrap of paper into his hand. The motion was swift, practiced, and unnoticed by those around them. Winston's heart lurched. He hid the paper in his palm, scarcely daring to breathe. The risk was enormous. A single piece of unapproved writing could condemn them both. He waited, his face blank, until he was safely alone at his desk. Then, slowly, he unfolded the note. 3 words stared back at him, scrawled in hurried, uneven letters. I love you. For a moment, the world tilted. Winston read the words again and again, scarcely believing them. A surge of joy and terror coursed through him. It was madness. It was salvation. In 3 words, everything had changed. The days that followed were agony. They dared not speak, dared not meet openly. Each moment in the ministry was a theater of restraint. Eyes forward, faces blank. But when they passed in the corridors, a brush of the hand, a fleeting glance, was enough to send Winston's heart racing. At last, they found a way. In the clamor of Victory Square, amidst the chaos of a crowd watching prisoners marched past, Julia slipped beside him. Her voice was quick, low, urgent. A meeting place, a time, and then she was gone. The appointed day came. Winston walked through the countryside beyond the city, fields stretching out under the pale spring sun. It was there, in the quiet, where telescreens could not reach and microphones might be scarce, that he saw her. Julia approached, her face flushed, her eyes alive with something fierce and secret. There, in the golden country of his dreams, Winston and Julia embraced. For the first time in his life, Winston felt the thrill of true defiance. Not shouted slogans, not bitter diary entries, but the raw human act of choosing desire over obedience. In Julia's arms, he discovered a freedom the party could not touch. It was fragile, perilous, destined for discovery, but in that moment, it was real. Chapter 5: The Secret Life. Their meetings became a secret rhythm, woven carefully into the gray monotony of life under the party. At first, Winston and Julia stole time in hidden corners of the countryside, fields beyond the reach of telescreens, woods thick with silence, places where the air still carried the scent of earth instead of boiled cabbage. Every encounter was perilous, every touch was a crime, yet the danger only sharpened their desire. Julia's rebellion was not born of politics, but of instinct. She hated the party because it strangled joy, because it smothered life with rules and slogans. She understood the machinery of oppression, but unlike Winston, she did not dream of revolution or the overthrow of Big Brother. She lived in the moment, carving out pockets of freedom, defying in small, tangible ways. For her, rebellion was making love, stealing pleasures, laughing where laughter was forbidden. For Winston, it was different. Each secret meeting felt like more than desire. It was history reclaimed, humanity resurrected. With Julia, he felt the fragile threads of truth that the party could not erase. The warmth of her body, the quickness of her smile, the certainty of her touch. These things were real. No amount of propaganda could deny them. But soon the countryside was not enough. They needed a place to belong, if only for stolen hours. It was Winston who thought of the little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. The old man, gray-haired and mild, sold trinkets from a forgotten age, coral paperweights, dusty books, relics of a world before the party. In his shop, telescreens did not seem to exist, and suspicion did not hang heavy in the air. When Winston asked timidly about renting the small upstairs room, Charrington agreed, his eyes kind, his voice gentle. The room became their sanctuary. Its ceiling was low, its furniture worn, but to Winston and Julia it was a palace. A bed with a soft coverlet, a table by the window, a kettle to boil water. These simple luxuries felt like miracles. Here they could remove their masks, speak freely, and let their bodies rest without fear. On the mantelpiece, Winston placed the glass paperweight he had bought from Charrington. Inside it, a fragment of coral lay suspended, delicate and eternal. To Winston, the paperweight was their love, fragile, enclosed, yet enduring against the tide of the party's oppression. As he watched the coral glow softly in the dim light, he imagined their lives captured in its stillness, untouched by Big Brother's gaze. Days turned into weeks, each visit to the room a respite from the crushing weight of Oceania. They talked, they laughed, they whispered stories of their childhoods, patchwork memories of a past the party had tried to erase. Julia confessed her countless small acts of defiance, affairs with party men, petty sabotages, tiny rebellions hidden in plain sight. Winston, at first shocked, realized that her shameless honesty was its own kind of strength. She did not care about being pure or noble. She cared about surviving, and in surviving, defying. But beneath their stolen happiness lingered the shadow of inevitability. Winston knew it could not last. The thought police were everywhere. The party did not allow sanctuaries. Sooner or later, the door would crash open, the room torn apart, their love destroyed. But he clung to the belief that each stolen day was victory enough. One evening, as they lay together in the quiet, Winston looked at Julia and whispered, "We are the dead." She pressed her lips to his ear and answered, "We are the dead, but we're not dead yet." It was a fragile defiance, a truth spoken against the darkness. For as long as the room above Mr. Charrington's shop remained theirs, as long as the paperweight remained unbroken, they were alive, and that in itself was rebellion. Chapter 6. O'Brien's Invitation. The room above Mr. Charrington's shop had become Winston and Julia's fragile paradise, but even within its quiet walls, Winston's thoughts wandered to something larger. Desire and stolen moments were defiance, yes, but he longed for more. Somewhere beyond the shadows of Oceania, he wanted to believe there must exist an organized resistance, a force capable of striking at the party, of tearing down Big Brother's tyranny. That belief crystallized around one man, O'Brien. From the first time Winston had encountered the inner party official, he had sensed something different. O'Brien was intelligent, self-assured, but never robotic in his loyalty. His heavy, composed presence, his measured way of speaking, it was as if he carried secrets in plain sight. Winston clung to the possibility that O'Brien, like himself, harbored thoughts forbidden by the party. One evening, in the ministry corridors, O'Brien gave Winston a fleeting glance, brief but electric. There was something deliberate in it, something that suggested recognition. Weeks later, O'Brien approached him with a casual remark about newspeak. He complimented Winston on his use of language, then added, almost as an afterthought, that he had a copy of the definitive newspeak dictionary Winston might like to see. He gave Winston his address. The gesture was subtle, ordinary on the surface, yet it carried the weight of conspiracy. Winston trembled at the thought. The party did not make mistakes. If O'Brien truly was sympathetic, this could be the beginning of something extraordinary. If not, if it was a trap, then Winston's life was already forfeit. At last, he and Julia resolved to go. They entered O'Brien's luxurious apartment in the inner party quarter with pounding hearts. The contrast to their own bleak lives was overwhelming. Thick carpets, soft lighting, wine and crystal glasses, servants who moved with silent efficiency. The telescreen on the wall was large and ever-present, yet O'Brien, with a flick of his wrist, turned it off. Winston and Julia froze. The telescreen never turned off. "You can switch it off," O'Brien said calmly, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "We have that privilege." It was then Winston knew this was no ordinary encounter. They spoke cautiously at first, but O'Brien guided the conversation with quiet authority. He asked Winston what he wanted, what he believed. Winston confessed everything, his hatred of the party, his certainty that Big Brother's rule was a monstrous lie, his desire to fight for a different future. Julia, too, declared her rebellion, though in her blunt, practical way. O'Brien listened, nodding gravely. Then he spoke of a shadowy brotherhood, a network of men and women who worked to undermine the party from within. It had no central leadership, no headquarters, only whispers and acts of sabotage scattered across the world. To join meant sacrifice. perhaps death, perhaps worse. "Are you prepared," O'Brien asked, "to give your life?" "Yes," Winston replied without hesitation. "To commit murder, to betray your country, to use falsehoods, to corrupt the minds of children, to throw sulfuric acid in a child's face if it would serve the cause." Winston swallowed hard. "Yes." Julia's voice echoed his. "Yes." O'Brien regarded them with solemn approval. "You will receive no glory. You will never know who else belongs. You may be caught tomorrow or live another 20 years, but once you enter, there is no turning back." He handed Winston a small book, promising it contained the truth behind the party's rule, the writings of Emmanuel Goldstein, the Brotherhood's elusive leader. As they left, O'Brien's words lingered in Winston's mind. For the first time, he felt not just like a rebel in secret, but part of something vast, something powerful. He and Julia were no longer alone. The dream of resistance had become tangible. The paperweight on the mantel, the room above the shop, the love they shared, all of it now seemed tied to a larger purpose. The future, though uncertain, gleamed faintly before him. Chapter 7. Betrayal and Capture. The little room above Mr. Charrington's shop had become the beating heart of Winston and Julia's rebellion. Within its worn walls they had lived as if free, sharing secrets, whispering dreams, clinging to each other in defiance of the party's suffocating grip. The paperweight on the mantelpiece glowed softly in the dim light, its coral suspended forever in glass, untouched by the world outside. Winston sometimes believed the room itself existed within that fragile sphere, timeless, safe, inviolable. But the party allowed no sanctuaries. One evening, as Winston lay beside Julia on the creaking bed, their bodies tired but content, a sound broke through the air. It was not a shout or a knock, but something subtler, a voice. It came from behind the picture that hung above the bed, the painting of an old church that had seemed so harmless. "You are the dead," the voice declared. Winston froze. Julia sat up sharply, her face draining of color. "You are the dead," the voice repeated, mechanical and merciless. Winston's heart stopped. The picture crashed forward, and behind it, embedded in the wall, gleamed the black, unblinking eye of a telescreen. There was no time to move, no time even to think. The room filled with the tramp of heavy boots. The window shattered. Shouts filled the air. The door burst open, and black-uniformed thought police swarmed inside. Julia screamed once, a sound cut short as fists struck her down. Winston was dragged from the bed, his arms twisted behind him, his body pinned to the floor. He could not fight. He did not try. All strength left him in a single moment of realization. They had been watched all along. Every kiss, every whisper, every dream of freedom had unfolded beneath the party's gaze. The paperweight crashed to the floor, shattering into fragments. The coral within lay exposed, small and pitiful. Winston stared at it through blurred vision, knowing it was the perfect symbol of their love. Fragile, broken, destroyed. Mr. Charrington entered the room, his mild, grandfatherly face now transformed. His eyes were cold, his posture rigid, his voice clipped with authority. He was not a harmless shopkeeper after all, but a thought police agent. His deception had been flawless. Winston, dazed with betrayal, felt almost foolish for ever believing otherwise. Julia was hauled upright beside him, her face bloodied, her body trembling. For a moment their eyes met. There was no time for words, but in that single glance, Winston saw everything: love, defiance, fear, and the bitter acknowledgment that their fragile rebellion was over. The thought police bound their hands and dragged them down the narrow staircase, through the shop that had once seemed a haven. The street outside was empty, silent, as though the city itself had conspired in their capture. A van waited, its back doors yawning open like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. Winston was thrown inside. Julia followed, her body limp, her face turned away. The doors slammed shut, cutting off the night air. In the suffocating darkness, Winston realized the truth he had always known, but never admitted. The party was invincible. Every step of their rebellion, every scrap of defiance, had been anticipated. They had never been free. They had only been permitted to believe they were free, for a time. The van rumbled forward, Winston shackled in the dark, his thoughts spiraling. He had dreamed of resistance, of the brotherhood, of toppling the great edifice of Big Brother. Now those dreams collapsed into dust. The real brotherhood, if it existed at all, had no power here. There remained only the ministry of love, the place of no love at all. It awaited him now, vast and merciless. Chapter 8. The Torture of Truth. The ministry of love was not a place of love at all. It was a place without windows, without clocks, without the faintest trace of mercy. Its walls gleamed white under a glare of lights that never dimmed. Silence hung in the corridors, broken only by the echo of boots or the sudden crack of a door slamming shut. Time itself ceased to exist here. There was only waiting, fear, and pain. Winston sat in a small cell, the hard bench beneath him digging into his bones. Sometimes he shared the space with other prisoners, party members and proles alike, each pale and broken, awaiting their turn. Other times he was alone, left only with his thoughts. His mind circled endlessly around Julia, where she was, what was happening to her, but he knew such thoughts were useless. The party did not allow attachments. They would tear her away from him as surely as they would tear his beliefs from his mind. The interrogations began gradually. At first, men in white coats and black uniforms asked questions. Who was he working with? What did he know of the Brotherhood? What were his crimes? He answered, but his answers never mattered. The questions were only preludes to the real purpose of the ministry of love. Soon enough, pain followed. The first blows were simple, fists, boots, clubs, but that was only the beginning. Machines hummed to life, their dials turned by unseen hands. Winston was strapped to a metal contraption, his body bent, stretched, twisted, until the scream tore itself from his throat, whether he willed it or not. Still, the torture was not only of the body. It was of the mind. His captors shouted slogans at him until the words throbbed inside his skull. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. The phrases hammered into him with every question and every lash of pain seemed to blur the boundaries of thought itself. Days, weeks, perhaps months slipped by. Time had no meaning in the ministry of love. Winston's body wasted away, but his mind clung desperately to shreds of resistance. He told himself he could endure anything if he did not betray Julia. That was the one line he would not cross. And then O'Brien came. Winston had once believed O'Brien was a friend, a fellow conspirator, a man of the Brotherhood. Seeing him in the cold, sterile room was like seeing a ghost. O'Brien's presence filled the air with authority. He did not shout or strike. He spoke with calm precision, as though every word was fact, and Winston's only choice was to accept. "Winston," O'Brien said softly, "you are here because you failed to understand.
The party is eternal. The brotherhood does not exist. Resistance does not exist. Your love, your rebellion, they are illusions. All that is real is the party. Winston tried to argue, but pain silenced him. O'Brien himself controlled the dials of the machine. He tightened screws, stretched Winston's body beyond endurance, and then, when Winston writhed on the floor, he leaned close and whispered, "You will be cured. You will love Big Brother." Cured. The word chilled Winston more than the word punished. O'Brien did not want his death. He wanted his surrender. Death was not enough for the party. It demanded obedience, even from the heart. Between bouts of agony, O'Brien lectured him on the party's philosophy. Power was not a means, it was an end. The party sought power for its own sake, absolute and eternal. Reality itself was not fixed, but malleable, shaped by the will of those who ruled. 2 plus 2 could equal 5 if the party decreed it, and if Winston believed otherwise, then he was mad. Winston listened, broken and bleeding, yet still clutching at the last threads of defiance. He told himself that truth existed, that freedom was possible, that love could survive. He told himself he could endure O'Brien, the ministry, even the endless pain, so long as he held Julia in his heart.
Chapter 9. Room 101. For all the tortures Winston had endured, stretching machines, blinding lights, fists and clubs, there remained one place he dreaded above all others. Every prisoner in the ministry of love spoke of it in whispers, with terror etched into their eyes. Some wept at its mention, others screamed to be spared. That place was room 101. The day came when Winston's turn arrived. The guards said nothing as they hauled him from his cell. His legs, weak from hunger and beatings, barely carried him down the endless white corridors. At last, a door swung open, and the number glared down at him like a sentence carved in stone. Inside, O'Brien waited, calm, deliberate, composed, as though he had been expecting Winston all along. His eyes glowed not with hatred, but with something colder, certainty. "Do you know what awaits you in room 101, Winston?" O'Brien asked gently. Winston shook his head, though fear gnawed at him. "The thing in room 101, O'Brien said, is the worst thing in the world." The phrase chilled Winston more than pain ever had. The worst thing, different for each person, tailored precisely to their deepest dread. For some it was suffocation, for others fire. For Winston it was what O'Brien had discovered long ago in the hollows of his mind: rats. The door opened again and a guard entered carrying a wire cage. Inside, 2 starved rats writhed and squealed, their yellow teeth gnashing, their claws scratching against the bars. The sound alone made Winston's skin crawl, his stomach clench. He had dreamed of this terror, dreamed of vermin crawling on his face. Now the dream had become real. O'Brien lifted the cage and held it close. The rats lunged at the bars, sensing food. A contraption was fixed to the front of the cage, a mask-like device designed to fit over the prisoner's head to unleash the animals upon his face. "This," O'Brien said, his voice calm, "is room 101, the worst thing in the world." Panic consumed Winston. He struggled against his bonds, his voice breaking into desperate pleas. "No, O'Brien, not that. Anything else. Tell me what you want." O'Brien's face did not change. He began to move the cage closer.
Do you not understand, Winston? The party does not care about your words. It does not care about confessions or lies. It seeks only power, power over the mind, over the heart. You must be remade until nothing remains but obedience. The rats shrieked, their bodies pressing against the bars. Winston's mind shattered. He screamed, begged, writhed in pure terror. In the flood of panic, only one thought emerged: escape at any cost. And then the words tore from his throat, raw and uncontrollable. Do it to Julia, not me. Tear her face off. Strip her to the bone, not me. Julia, not me. The scream echoed in the sterile room, more damning than any confession. O'Brien lowered the cage, satisfied. The moment had come. Winston's last refuge, his love for Julia, the belief that he could keep her safe within his heart, was destroyed. He had betrayed her, cast her to the rats to save himself. And in that betrayal, the party won. O'Brien leaned close, his voice almost tender. You see, Winston, everyone breaks. You are cured. The cage was withdrawn. The rats squealed in frustration, but they did not touch him. It no longer mattered. Winston had already been broken. When they carried him from room 101, Winston's body sagged like an empty shell. The pain, the fear, the torment had all achieved their purpose. He no longer belonged to himself. His love for Julia was gone, sacrificed in his desperation. What remained was nothing but a hollow vessel ready to be filled with devotion to Big Brother.
Chapter 10. The Love of Big Brother. Winston sat alone at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, his hands wrapped around a warm glass of gin. The hum of conversation and the clatter of cups filled the room, but he hardly noticed. Around him, men and women played at life, murmuring party slogans, exchanging empty smiles, their eyes dull, their expressions hollow. This was the world he had known for years, yet now it seemed more real than ever, not because of freedom, but because of its suffocating, inescapable certainty. He had returned from the ministry of love a changed man, not merely battered, not merely terrified, but reborn in obedience. The tortures, the betrayals, the hours in room 101, they had done their work. Winston no longer believed in rebellion, in truth, or even in the fragile love he had shared with Julia. She existed now only in memory, a dim echo of the man he had once been. And in that echo, he had betrayed her. The telescreen on the wall droned the latest victories of Oceania. Wars had been won and lost, enemies defeated and proclaimed dead, histories rewritten and forgotten. Winston listened, absorbed in the words not as lies, but as truths. They no longer jarred him. They made sense. The party was right. Big Brother was right. There was no alternative, no other world, no secret resistance waiting in the shadows. He thought of Julia briefly. A flicker of memory passed through his mind, the warmth of her touch, the sound of her voice, but it was immediately replaced by the cold certainty of his own betrayal. He had chosen survival over love, obedience over passion, and in that choice he had found clarity. Winston looked around the cafe and saw men and women playing the same roles he had once scorned. They cheered when news of victories was announced. They fumed when a supposed traitor was punished. Yet no spark of rebellion remained in their eyes. They were shells, vessels of party loyalty, and Winston understood with grim relief that he was now one of them. A sudden wave of emotion, calm, clear, and absolute, rose within him. It was not fear, nor love for Julia, nor even hope. It was the love the party demanded, the love that O'Brien had forged in Room 101, the love that had replaced all other passions. He felt it now in the deepest fibers of his being, love for Big Brother. For years he had fought internally, clinging to fragments of memory and glimpses of forbidden truth. But those days were gone. The struggle had ended. Resistance had been crushed. Even his dreams of freedom, once vivid and radiant, now lay buried beneath the certainty that there was no world outside Oceania, no reality beyond what the party dictated. He sipped his gin, warm and bitter, and the sensation seemed to anchor him to the present, to the life he now accepted without question. He reflected on the path that had brought him here, the diary, the stolen love, the illusions of rebellion, the betrayals and tortures. Each step had been necessary, he now realized, to arrive at this final clarity. And in this clarity there was peace. Winston's heart, once heavy with doubt, fear, and longing, was now light. He had survived, he had been remade, and above all, he loved Big Brother. The eyes on the posters stared down at him, not with menace, but with the calm authority of a god. And Winston met that gaze without fear, without hesitation, without thought of rebellion. He was finally complete, finally loyal, finally free, in the only way Oceania allowed. The gin slid down his throat, warming him as he stared at the telescreen, smiling faintly, perfectly content. Big Brother had won, and Winston's mind and heart were entirely his. The struggle was over. The party was eternal. And Winston loved Big Brother.